Mike never expected his slow Tuesday morning to turn into something that would change him forever. The sun hadn't even cleared the rooftops when he heard the crunch of tires on the gravel outside his old auto shop. He wiped his hands on his faded coveralls, peeking through the streaked window at the shiny black SUV that looked like it belonged more at a mansion than near his battered garage door. He figured maybe it was some rich guy's assistant dropping off a classic car for an oil change, but when the passenger door opened, it wasn't an engine that needed him. The woman stepped out first, tall and graceful, wearing a long wool coat despite the early spring warmth. She pushed her sunglasses up on her head, revealing eyes that were too tired for someone dressed that well. Mike noticed her rings first, the kind you only saw in magazines, and then he noticed the little girl she gently helped out of the car. She looked about 8, her hair pulled back with a bright ribbon that didn't quite hide how pale she was. The electric wheelchair she sat in looked expensive but lifeless, the footrest dragging slightly as it rolled. Mike greeted them both with a nod, but the mother barely returned his smile. She kept glancing back at the car, like she wanted to be anywhere but here. The girl didn't say anything, just held her small hands together in her lap while Mike crouched down. He asked what was wrong, and the woman hesitated, explaining that the motor had shorted out during a family trip and that none of the companies who built it could send someone out for days. She'd heard somehow that Mike could fix anything. He almost laughed at the idea, but the little girl's eyes stopped him. He leaned closer, inspecting the motor housing near the wheelbase, brushing away a few strands of the girl's hair that had drifted in front of the controls. It was a mess. Custom parts, strange wiring, tiny foreign bolts. He could feel the mother watching him like she wanted him to say it was hopeless so she could take her daughter back to the city. Instead, he stood up, rubbed his neck, and told her he'd need a few hours, maybe all day, but he'd do what he could. The woman sighed, her polished shoes tapping on the concrete while she checked her phone again. Mike rolled the chair inside, careful not to jostle the girl too much. He noticed her grip tighten on the armrest when he hit a bump in the floor. He wheeled her next to an old workbench cluttered with spark plugs and wrenches. She watched him the whole time with wide, curious eyes, but never spoke. Mike asked her name softly. She said Emily so quietly he almost didn't hear her. He nodded, told her she could sit tight and watch if she wanted, and flicked on the ancient desk lamp he used for every project since he was 20. He got to work pulling apart the side panel, careful not to scratch the smooth plastic that cost more than his truck. He could feel Emily's gaze on him as he poked around the wiring. He asked her if she liked her chair, if she could go fast in it when it worked. She nodded and whispered that she missed racing her dog around their garden. Mike grinned at that, trying to picture the giant mansion lawn where a kid like her could just be a kid. He told her he'd do his best to get her wheels back under her. Hours slipped by in greasy handfuls of bolts and frayed wires. Mike rummaged through bins of spare parts he'd kept for years. Bits of old golf carts, a broken scooter motor, tiny copper connectors he hadn't seen since his uncle's lawnmower died. Emily didn't complain once, though the sun shifted from his left shoulder to his right. Her mother sat in the corner on a dusty metal chair, flipping through emails, voice low and sharp when she answered calls. Mike wondered what it was like to have money fix every problem except the one sitting in front of him now. By late afternoon, he had the casing split open on his bench. He tapped a corroded wire, clicked his tongue, and asked Emily if she'd mind him replacing a few parts with old ones. She shrugged shyly and said she trusted him. He realized she really meant it. Nobody had trusted Mike for a long time. Not with money, not with promises, not with anything that delicate. But Emily did. That tiny nod gave him a burst of energy he hadn't felt since he first opened his shop. He cracked his knuckles and bent back to work as the shadows grew long. He barely noticed the mother staring at him now, her phone forgotten in her lap. Mike asked her to hold the flashlight while he soldered new connections deep in the belly of the motor housing. She held it steady, hands trembling when sparks jumped from the tip. Emily leaned forward to watch the glow, her eyes reflecting the tiny electric bursts that might just bring her freedom back. Mike worked in silence, sweat dripping down his forehead. the garage filled with the low hum of a country song playing from a dusty old radio in the corner. The clock on the wall clicked past midnight before Mike finally leaned back and let out a breath he'd been holding for hours. The last wire was soldered, the final screw tightened down with care. Emily had drifted off, head resting against the side rail of her chair, small breaths making her ribbon flutter. Her mother stood beside Mike now, her arms crossed, but not in judgment anymore, in worry, in hope. Mike wiped his hands on an old rag, glancing at the little girl who had trusted him more than any grown-up had in years. He knelt by the chair, careful not to wake her as he flipped the main switch near the joystick. A soft green light flickered alive on the side panel. Mike exhaled a silent prayer that it would hold. He gently nudged Emily's shoulder and her eyes fluttered open. She blinked at him, then at her mother, confusion slowly giving way to a shy smile as she realized the quiet hum she could now hear. Under her seat, Mike asked if she wanted to try it. She nodded so quickly her ribbon slipped sideways, making her giggle. Her mother reached for her hand, but then pulled it back, almost afraid to hope. Mike backed away, giving Emily room as she placed her small hands on the controls. The chair lurched forward an inch, then rolled smooth as silk across the old concrete floor. Emily let out a tiny gasp that bounced off the garage walls like a song. She turned the chair gently in a circle, testing the new motor Mike had cobbled together from forgotten parts. Her mother's eyes filled with tears she didn't bother to wipe away this time. Mike leaned against his workbench, arms folded, pretending he wasn't grinning ear to ear. He watched Emily steer toward her mother, the wheels gliding easily over oil stains and stray bolts that had tripped up so many grown men in that shop. The woman knelt down, wrapping her arms around her daughter's small frame as the chair came to a soft stop in front of her. Her shoulders shook as she cried quietly into Emily's hair, whispering words that Mike couldn't hear but felt deep in his chest. She stood up at last and turned to Mike, trying to find the right words. She offered him a small white envelope, something that probably held more money than Mike made in a month. He shook his head, wiping his greasy palms on his shirt, mumbling that the only payment he wanted was to see Emily rolling around that fancy garden she'd told him about. The mother insisted, but Mike only laughed, saying he was too old to spend new money anyway. He told Emily to promise him she'd race her dog for him tomorrow. The SUV's headlights cast long beams across the empty garage as the family got ready to leave. Mike helped lift the toolbox he'd used into the back, careful not to scratch the black paint. Emily turned in her seat and gave him a small wave through the open window, her smile brighter than any shiny new car he'd ever fixed. Her mother paused before getting in, placing a soft hand on Mike's arm. She didn't say thank you. Her tears had already done that. Instead, she simply nodded, eyes shining in the harsh garage lights. When the tail lights disappeared into the night, Mike stood alone under the buzzing fluorescent bulbs. He looked around his cluttered shop, littered with scraps and half-finished projects. It wasn't a palace, but tonight it felt like the most important place on earth. He sat on his old stool, the one with a cracked seat, staring at the empty spot where Emily's chair had rested. For once, he didn't feel like a broke mechanic with grease under his nails. He felt like a man who'd put something back together that really mattered. The next morning, Mike showed up at his workbench with fresh coffee and a grin that wouldn't fade. He could still see Emily's small hand waving from the back seat, could hear the soft hum of her freedom rolling away. Word spread quickly in town that the old garage guy had done what specialists couldn't, but Mike didn't care about the whispers or the fancy offers that came in later. All he cared about was that somewhere in a garden far bigger than his shop, a little girl named Emily was racing her dog with the wind on her face.